This week's reading, that means on Shabbat, we will be reading a section which is referred to as Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah. Sarah, who was the father of Abraham. And from this point on, there is a discussion that when she died, Abraham was looking for a place where he was going to bury her, and he found a cave in Hebron. And there are many aspects to this one section here, in addition to many others, but I think there's enough right here for us to cover this morning. Firstly, the Zohar asks, why does the Torah enumerate the years of how long she lived? In fact, very extensively, when it says, and the lifetime of Sarah was 100 years, 7 years, 20 year, where just no other place does it mention the death of a woman, as if the Zohar is indicating that usually the men in the Torah are the significant ones. I mean, this is the impression we might come up with from what the Zohar has to say, but obviously it's not correct because the Torah would not give this reading a name, Chayei Sarah, if she was that insignificant. So obviously that is not the answer. Another question that Rashi raises right here when it states that she died right after the Akedat Yitzchak. Akedat Yitzchak was the binding of Isaac. And Rashi says that when Sarah heard that Abraham had taken Isaac to be slaughtered on the altar, that she died that day. In fact, she did die that day, the day that he was taken on the altar to be slaughtered. She couldn't handle it, and therefore she died on that day. That would be very difficult for us to accept. I mean, if we take Rashi's interpretation literally, that we're discussing a woman who is not merely just a woman part of a historical account of what happened from the time of creation, as everyone here present understands that the Torah is actually the code by which we can draw out or achieve for ourselves a little extra energy to provide us in our daily living. And that was the purpose of the Zohar, to unravel the code. And therefore, to understand that Sarah had died because of the Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac, comes to us difficult to grasp this kind of a concept, and there are many who question, as I've just raised that question. Insofar as in fact, to strengthen the question, the Zohar asks, why in fact is there this specific enumeration, 100 and 20 and 7? Because the Zohar, going on the basis that this is not a recording of history, and the changing of the wording, where it says, if you noticed when I began reading, it says Mea Shana, 100 year. Hebrew, the plural for year is Shanim, and it says 100 year in the singular, Ve'esrim Shana in the singular, and Sheva Shanim, and Sheva and 7 in the plural. I mean, why 7? Why 7 in the plural? Why not 100? And why enumerate it? Why not just say 127 years? So the Zohar, and I'd like to read that because it is before the rising of the morning star, and for those of you not familiar, the period when the light force of God reaches this earth, reaches man, and is from 12 o'clock until the rising of the morning star, in which there is a complete layer of protection that anyone connecting with the light force at this time need not worry that maybe he's not prepared for all of the energy that is flowing. And since it is the morning star today is 5:29, so we will take advantage. And if you weren't conscious of it, if I just read the Zohar and you were not conscious of it, I would have been depriving you of an additional benefit, because we know the action without the consciousness is like the Zohar says, prayer without the consciousness. It's not a prayer, even though you're praying, and even though we're studying. But if you weren't conscious that now we want to tap the light of when the presence of God is felt in a secured, in a balanced manner for anyone to just tap. And that's why many people or Kabbalists would always rise during the evening before the morning star, so they can connect. And certainly the Zohar is the protection that we certainly feel we need today with all of the problems that we encounter. It says here that she lived 127 years, and then the next verse, it says, and Sarah died b'Kiryat Arba. She died in Kiryat Arba. That's the place where in Hebron. It's another name for Hebron. Kiryat Arba. Hebron. This is Hebron. It's called the city of four. The Eretz Canaan, in the land of Canaan. And I read now from the Zohar. Tama Sarah b'Kiryat Arba. Da Baba Amar, Kegav nada lo have b'kol nashei alma. I'm reading the Aramaic because that makes our connection to the extreme of its connection with the reading of the Aramaic. But I'll translate. Whatever is stated here does not say recorded by any other women. Because here by Sarah, not only does it state that she died, which also is recited by other women, but it states the how long, which does not state by Miriam. For example, it says Miriam died. Devar Meneket Yitzchak, and many other women where it says they died. However, here it enumerates, it states specifically how old she was, which does not state by any other woman, and also it tells us the place where she was buried. Says the Zohar, and it also tells us where she was buried. To enlighten us, what was in Sarah, what was contained within Sarah, what her place in this world was, as opposed to all other women. There was none like her. Miriam. If you say, what about Miriam? It says that Miriam died. Now I'm repeating what, now the Zohar is stating what I had already mentioned previously. In fact, the reason why it's mentioning And this is a distinction, and this gives us an insight into what we here this morning hope to achieve, what we want, what do we want from this session here. We certainly haven't come just to gather some information, because there's more information that I can give you in an hour and a half, and you have much more in the library. Now, we've come here to gather a little energy from this session. It says the Zohar, the only reason why Miriam is mentioned, the death of Miriam is mentioned, because it's telling us of a tragedy that occurred with the death of Miriam. That when Miriam died, the be'er, the well that accompanied, literally accompanied the Jews throughout their sojourn in the desert. Imagine a well. Well, we have to dig a well, bring up the water if we're in the desert or wherever we might be. Here, there was no necessity for the Jews to dig wherever they camped for water, but there was a well literally walking with them. There are a few other aspects that we were discussing. That's one of the aspects. Anyway, therefore, in what way does Sarah differ from Miriam? Because the death of Miriam was to indicate that now that well stopped flowing for the Jews. Now they had difficulty with water, as it is stated in the Bible, and therefore that is the only reason. Sarah's reason, the reason for mentioning Sarah, is another reason. But still, it doesn't state how many years she lived, so it's still different than Sarah. But another difference is that the women that are mentioned are only referring to a tragic event. So what is going on here? What does the Torah want to tell us here? I remember when we lived extensively in Israel, and we used to go every month. Since we lived in Israel, we used to go every month, as it is stated in this week's reading of the Zohar too, to go connect with the tzaddikim, Rabbi Shimon, Hebron, and so forth. So I'll never forget, but we used to take when the boys were very small, and their friends used to say, where are you going? Well, we're going to the house where Rabbi Shimon lives, where Abraham lives, where they live. They live in this house. In other words, the mausoleum, and of course the grave site of the Ari. I mean, just a tombstone over there. But he lives in that house. Funny kind of a house, but he lives in that house. It was a nice explanation, but in effect, it was true. It was true. And here, the Zohar mentions this place where she was buried, Me'arat HaMachpelah, was a different kind of a place. What was different about this place? That when Sarah died, an unusual discussion that takes place. That when Sarah died and Abraham was bringing her to this place to be buried, how did he know that's where he should bury her? Asks the Zohar. Why here? Why not somewhere else? So the Zohar says, well, he was. If you may have read this in the Wheels of a Soul, I bring this down that before a person dies, he comes to Hebron. He sees the light, if you recall, and this is in fact what many people recite in cases of clinical death. Cases of clinical death, they all where the person's been declared legally dead. In fact, the person then experiences, observing himself or herself on the bed, and they're trying to revive her, and this person who's unconscious or in a coma can recite exactly what everyone was talking about. And of course, this is impossible. But this has already been ascertained that there is such a thing as clinical death. And they will all say that they experienced coming to a cave, and at the end of the cave there's a light, and they wanted very much to run towards this light, and they want to become attached to the light. And then the voice comes out and says, "No, not yet," and they recede from the light, etc. And this is the story that the Zohar says about this cave. That Avraham, when he entered the cave, he saw the same idea. He saw the form of Adam, as it is also stated in the Zohar, and therefore he knew that this was the place. Now, another very interesting thing is mentioned in this Zohar. I want to give you more information, so I'm not going through each reading, just connecting with it, and then I just give it to you orally. That when Abraham brought Sarah to be buried there, and listen to the story carefully. This week is important. In fact, I'm deviating a little from the actual reading. And it says that when Hava, the wife of Adam, who was also buried in this same place, saw Sarah coming in, she left. She said, I could not bear to stay or be buried in the same place as Sarah. Why? Because it is only due to my convincing Adam to eat from the tree of knowledge that the world continues on with suffering. And since she was such a righteous woman, and to have her now sitting next to me in this cave, right? I would feel the embarrassment, and it was so great that she walked out. She walked out. Continues the Zohar that she walks out, and Sarah says, "I will pray for you. I will pray for you." And by my praying, this somehow will alleviate the my presence being a thorn, because I would constantly be reminding you of my righteousness. This is the conversation that's going on now in this cave, in this, not cave, but the mausoleum as we see it today in Hebron is a mausoleum, but they're all underneath, they're buried. We're talking about buried people, supposedly. And with those words, Eve, Chava, returns and feels now content to be buried now in this cave. All very strange, right? And one other aspect that we want to cover, and that is the Zohar begins with this reading with the story of Vayisa et Yona v'yatileu el hayam v'yamud hayam mizafo. You all know the story of Jonah the whale, where God wanted him to tell the people how evil they were. They should change their ways, do the tshuva, do repentance, etc. And he did not want to assume this responsibility. And so he ran away. He ran away. And the Zohar says, and then of course when he was on this boat, a storm came, and they realized that Jonah was the cause of this apparent immediate sinking of the boat, and therefore they threw him overboard, and he was swallowed up by a whale. So, and the Zohar says, "Hake'it listakli," and this is the first paragraph on this portion. Here we have to look into my tama arishat yama. Alei Diona, V'lo Arishat Alei Ara. Now we know there are earthquakes. We know there are tidal waves. Why did God choose this method of creating a situation of where he's on a boat? Now Now there's a storm training up, and everyone's going to drown, and therefore they realize him. Why not perform the same idea, the same story on land? That's what the Zohar's question. Why? And in fact, the reason that it should have occurred on land, says the Zohar, and not on the water, is because he committed the sin where? Not on the water. He committed the sin of not following the beckoning of God on land. This is the Zohar's quote. Why did the water connect with him? And Zohar answers something very interesting. Very interesting. And what is the connection here to Sarah? It says this whole story here, says the Zohar, this whole story is not referring really to an incident where someone dies and you got to purchase a burial site, which is what this section is dealing with, but rather it's dealing with a person when he goes to sleep, a person whose soul leaves him without being conscious that the soul has left, as in the evening, every time we go to sleep, our souls leave. And, says the Zohar, when they threw Jonah overboard, his soul ran away, meaning it left his body. Meaning the soul left his body. In other words, the connection and the reason the Zohar says why I have brought this section in, to make a connection between Jonah and this section over here, Chayei Sarah. And the reason why it happened in the water, says the Zohar also, because the water, not land, water is the vessel by which the light force becomes revealed in water. And the Zohar says several things here which are almost impossible to understand, but there is a clue there, and that's what I'm alluding to. He says, he's talking about Shenishlecha Hasa'ah. When the Sa'ah is finished, then there is a form of resurrection. That's the answer. Well, that's the answer, is why all of this incident with Jonah occurred with the whale. And this is the connection to Sarah. Obviously, you, and as well as myself, when I read it, just what is the Zohar talking about? Sa'ah. Sa'ah is a measurement of water. The place where we have Sa'ah mentioned in the Talmud and in the Zohar is concerning mikveh. You all know what a mikveh is. A place where women supposedly become purified after their menstrual. There are even some men that go to the mikveh. It's not only for women, but there's a complete distortion, unfortunately, about what this mikveh is about. And I just want to share something with you, because I feel that once we discuss this, we throw it out into the cosmos, and I have seen things happen the moment it is discussed, the same way as I have repeatedly mentioned in my writings and publicly that that Einstein's revelation of the theory of relativity only came about because just a few years before his revelation, Rabbi Ashlag revealed through the Ari HaKadosh the theory of relativity. So it wasn't Einstein who was the first one to bring the theory of relativity. But who was Rabbi Ashlag? He certainly wasn't a Nobel Prize winner in physics, and so naturally nobody would consider what he had to say. If we throw out this portion, and this portion is talking about in the whole Zohar, the theme of the Zohar is Sarah's alive. She's having a discussion with Chava, Eve, right? And this whole section, including the Zohar, is referring to Tchiyat HaMeitim. Tchiyat HaMeitim. What does it mean, Tchiyat HaMeitim? Resurrection of the dead. This week, only this week, did all this seem to come together, plus another dramatic event that happened this week that I'm going to read to you, which I had never seen. I mean, there's tens of thousands of books, and in one lifetime it's not easy to read everything there is to read. And also this week, I received a phone call, first time in 30 years that I'm involved with Kabbalah. Someone calls and asks me if someone died and if I can resurrect the person. I mean, it's a little unusual request. I mean, I've never been asked to resurrect it. I've been asked sometimes to make a prayer to resurrect the dead. I've never been asked that before. Anyway, I'll go right to this revelation that I received this week and share it with you. For those of you not familiar with what resurrection of the dead means, unfortunately the book is almost going to come out, so I have to give it to you. You're going to have a preview of the book. I mentioned the word sa'ah. It's a measurement. It's a measurement. And I mention this in conjunction with the Zohar, who explains this idea of Jonah in the water, and connecting this with Sarah. What's the connection? How do they all come together? This is essentially what I want to share with you this morning. Anyway, Rabbi Avraham Azulai was the Kabbalist who is responsible for all of you sitting here this morning. It was Avraham Azulai who declared, some 400 years ago, who was born in Fez, Morocco, declared that the age of Aquarius had begun, and now everyone is permitted to study Kabbalah, although it didn't happen until 20 years ago, that the center, which was also a closed place, just for select few, etc., that we just opened up the doors. Anybody want to learn Kabbalah, you're welcome to walk in. But he had already made that declaration. And he wrote this book, Chesed LaAvraham, and where he's discussing mikveh, the mikveh, the importance of it. And he says, I should mention another part, because all of these things have to do. It says, when Abraham is going to purchase this field, called the Ma'arat HaMachpelah, or Stay Ma'arat HaMachpelah, he speaks to Ephron. He says, how much do you want? This is all in the first section. How much do you want? And he says, whatever you want to give. And he says, no, I want you to tell me a sum. And in verse 15, he says, you know what, my lord, Ephron speaking to the owner of the field where Sarah is going to be buried, give me Abba Meyot shekel kesef. Give me 400 shekels of silver. What is it between you and me? Only bury your dead. Bury your dead over there. Bury your dead. Again, here's a story about a business deal being consummated, supposedly, right? And they arrive at the figure of 400 shekel. He says 400 shekel. What does that mean? How did he arrive? Why didn't he say 500? Why didn't he say 399? Why does Ephraim say 400? Okay, now keep bearing in mind all of these little pieces of information that we just received from the Zohar. I'll read this little section. Says Rabbi Avraham Azulai, incidentally, the deceased member's name was also Avraham. It's the weirdest story I can say that ever occurred in my life. I hope there'll be many, many other interesting ones like this. And also, incidentally, it's Avraham Azulai's death anniversary. He died this week too. So, I didn't have to be too much of a genius to realize that something is going on over here. Nobody ever called me to resurrect the dead. And what you're going to hear now is incredible. And the person's name is Avraham. He dies the same week as this Avraham. There must be something. Anyway, he gives us this information. Sheyesh Abba Meyot Kitot Hatuma Shoreh Al Hatumot. There are 400 levels, classes, 400 classes of Tumah, of uncleanliness. וכדי להעביר אותם הכיתות של רוח הטומאה, צריך על בטן שאה מים. In order to remove these, and he'll discuss what we're discussing when we're talking about Tumah. For those of you not familiar what Tumah means, it means uncleanliness, but it means Ruach HaTumah. He's shortly going to discuss that. Ruach HaTumah. What is Ruach HaTumah? A force. Ruach is a force of Tumah, a force of uncleanliness. It's not just uncleanliness, but it means levels of Tumah, and these are the things that make things go wrong. These are the things, Tumah, as it's stated in the Zohar and elsewhere, these are the forces that create all of the chaos. There are 400 levels of chaos in the world. Not 399, not 401, but 400 different aspects of chaos in the world. And in order, says Avraham Azulai, in order to remove this Ruach HaTumah, you need 40 sa of mayim. You need 40 of this sa. If you remember, that was the Zohar mentioning this incident of Yonah, the connection with Sa'ah, which didn't make any sense, supposedly. It doesn't make any sense what the connection was. What does it have to do with Sarah? You need 40 sa'ah. That's what a mikveh is supposed to comprise, of 40 sa'ah. This measurement, and we'll find, he'll tell us what is the measurement of a sa'ah, in order to remove all levels of tumah, all levels of forces of chaos. Tumah is chaos. Yeah, I think you would have probably learned this in the classes. What does tumah mean and what does tahor mean? Okay? No, tumah means where there is a short circuit of energy. No energy flow. Where there's no energy flow, there's darkness. There's death. There's everything that represents chaos. No light. Ubakol sa'ah magzeket kuf mem dalet beitzim. Now, what is the measurement of a sa'ah? It's a gross of eggs, average size eggs, 144. That's the exact measurement of a sa'ah of water. In other words, you assemble a gross of eggs, 144 eggs, and now you have one sa'ah, 144. V'kol ha'abayim sa'ah. And now that you need 40 sa'ah, we said the mikveh, this place of purification, must contain 40 sa, so you multiply 40, and you want to know the dimension of the mikveh. You multiply 40 times 144, and if you're a good mathematician, you come out to 5,760. 5,760. Okay? Then he goes into how much, what's the weight, very specific. In other words, if you want the exact dimension, it is Yud Beit Din. That's a certain weight. It's a certain weight. And then you know if that's the exact measurement of the Sa'ah. And because, continues Avraham Azulai, because a person is murkab midaled yisodot, ein taroto ela b'mayim. And if you want the removal of this tumah, these forces, 400 fossils, 400 classes of evil, of tumah, ein taroto ela b'mayim, only with water. And why? And he brings the verse of Zechariah. Here Zechariah is talking about the coming of Mashiach and the coming of the resurrection of the dead. And it says, and in that day, that time, the spirit of uncleanliness, the spirit, we're not talking about, because that's why some people think, well, look, if I take a bath, I get clean. Therefore, he's stressing the point that we're not discussing here uncleanliness in terms of mud or dirt or whatever. We're talking about the forces of tumah, not merely dirt. Dirt is not tumah. Because tumah does not mean it does not mean dirt. It means forces of short-circuitedness. And haruach ein b'tivo l'kaneh b'toch hamayim. Kishatumah nichna b'toch hamayim nishlach mimenu oto ruach hatumah. Because what happens if this force, a living force, like a bacteria, like a virus, whatever. Those are all forces of chaos. When they come in contact with water, the spirit of this force, there's a force. It's like an automobile. You have a motor. You take away the motor, you don't have a force of an automobile you may have. That's the same idea, says Avraham Azulai. This force of tumah, the force, when it comes in contact, just comes in contact with water, immediately disappears. It is evaporated. It is vaporized. No longer does it exist. Therefore, the only way to remove these forces is through water. And he brings other places where the idea of water is concerned. Now comes a little, but you're familiar with the idea. What is the power of water? In other words, we can accept what he said, and that's enough, but we know that the forces that we can make use of, that's why when Moshe makes announcements, we're entering into this level of consciousness, that level. What's the reason for him mentioning all these things? Let's just do our prayers and so on. Because Moshe knows that if you don't have that in your consciousness, and you're just doing the thing, but there is no consciousness, because like science says, like the Zohar says, the reality of everything is consciousness. That determines what goes on. Only consciousness. There's nothing more than consciousness. The physical reality is what we call illusionary. It comes and goes like the body of a person. Like the Zohar says, this week's portion. What's the body? Doesn't mean a person's dead when the body is buried. when the body is decomposed? Is that death? No, because the soul keeps going on. The bodies come and go. They are part of that illusionary realm. Illusionary realm meaning today it's here, tomorrow it's gone, it comes back again, etc. What is the force of water? The force of water comes mimidat the chachma. It comes from the level of chachma. Va'ot yud romez l'chachma. You all know about the tetragrammaton. It's essential that you know that what the letters represent. The yud represents. We have a blackboard maybe. A little spell. Yes. Okay, Moshe, that's right. Yud vav dalet is yud. That's how it's spelled out. Every letter in Hebrew. You have a letter, just one letter, yud. Moshe will just write just the yud now. Okay? That yud of the tetragrammaton represents chachma, the highest level of the light force. That's the purest level of the light force. Now, the letter yud spelled out, how do you say yud? How do you write yud? The little letter yud is a letter, but yud is also spelled out, and we must know this. Yud vav dalet. The vav is like a u. If you know how to read Hebrew, it's yud. U. Yud vav dalet. Yud. That's how it's pronounced. Now in Hebrew, we also know that the spelling out of the letter materializes the letter. Because when I say yud, you just hear the voice. You hear the sound of the yud. When it's spelled out, it's materialized. When you hear it, it's not materialized. Yes, sound is in a way materialized. But it's not as materialized as the spelling out. It's called spelling out in Kabbalah. So we have yud, vav, dalet. Yud. He discusses atoms here and so on, which are incredible. Anyway, a yud also is 144. It's a gross 144. How? The yud vav dalet. There we can make how many combinations of those three letter word yud vav dalet? You can make 6 combinations. What do I mean by 6 combinations? You have yud vav dalet, then you can have yud dalet vav, yud dalet vav. Now we have 2. Then you can use those same 3 letters and to have vav yud dalet and vav dalet yud. So everybody following this, it's very essential. Remember, yud represents chachma, and yud is the purest form of the light force. Okay? Now you have the dalet. Dalet yud vav. And dalet vav yud. And now we have all of the conceivable or feasible combinations of this 3-letter word. Okay? And you have 6 combinations. 6 combinations. If you add up these 6 combinations, because each letter we know in Hebrew, each letter in Hebrew represents a number. What does it mean? It means a number. You ask a physicist to say, the language of mathematics. What is the language of math? Numbers. Numbers is a power. Numbers represent for us things. 5 fingers. You learned why there are 5 fingers. What does it mean? There's a power. What's the power? What is the power in the fingers? Well, each one represents a keta, chachma, bina, and so on. Each letter, each number represents a force. So we have the addition, the total numerical value of these 6 combinations is 120. Okay, we have now 120. If we added up all of those letters, because this yud ultimately will tell us what the power is behind this yud, of which this mikveh that we're speaking about seems to correlate to. Okay? V'yud chet otiyot, and then you have 18 letters. That also says something. Why are there 18 letters? That is also an additional force beside the total numerical value, but each one, then you have the parts, then you have the sum of its parts in Kabbalah. You can have 50 strands of wire. When you combine the wires, is it 50 times the strength? No, it becomes another value. Another value. So this is the same idea here that we're discussing, just that you understand when the Ari makes this statement, this is where he's getting it from, that we're not just adding up to come to a certain conclusion, but rather the parts, if you add up all the parts, each letter, it comes to 144. Now, each letter is an embodiment of all of those parts. Let's say the Yud. Yud is 10. It combines 10 forces. The Yud itself represents a totality of these 10 forces. All right? So we have 18. And then we have another combination. We've taken the individual, then we've taken the collective, now we have another collective. We have 6 combinations. 6 combinations. Is everyone following what I'm saying? It's very essential, because this is going to create, in a short period of time, according to him, we're going to create something very revolutionary just by sitting here this morning, because this is the first time that I have ever given this session. So we have now the 6 that now combine the 144, combine the 18, and now we have another klal, as we say, another 6. There are 6 combinations. All told together is how much? 144. In other words, it just doesn't by chance add up. But this 144 is what is the force of the Yud. Not only metaphysically, but physically. When you have a gross, now you know why the idea of gross. Who came up with the idea of gross? 144. Could we make a gross 8 times 8, 64? Well, who decided on 144 to be a gross? Gross. Right? When you want pencils, you want a gross of pencils. You don't have to say 144, right? You want a gross of this, a gross of that. Everyone knows you mean 144. Who decided on that? Who decided on that? Well, now you know where the original idea is, because it comes to represent a unit. 144 is not just 12 times 12, but it's a unit. It's a unit. It is the force of 144 eggs. Therefore, what emerges from what we have just learned, that the Sa'ah is likened to the letter Yud, to tell us that each Yud and each Sa, therefore, each Sa can remove 10 kitot atumah. Each Sa, because the Yud is 10, therefore each Yud represents the removal of 10. Just like there's the 10 aspects of the light force, as we know, there are 10 aspects of the dark Lord. Everything in this world has a balance, good and evil. If we take the light force, make use of the light force, then we can eliminate the dark lord. How do you do that? You do that, first of all, with the knowledge that is required according to the Zohar. Without knowledge, without an active participation in one wanting to heal themselves. One wants to heal himself. Or if one wants to be healed. He must instill a concentration of consciousness. Without that, there must be a recurrence. This already has been established in science as well. The difference between consciousness of two people. One has a particular, two people have the same ailment. One can recover, the other one doesn't. The only difference is, says science, the attitudes. Attitudes. Well, what does an attitude mean? An attitude is consciousness. An attitude is consciousness. So, what emerges is that if 40 sa are required to remove 400, that means each sa'ah removes 10. Nimsa shahasa nitmot la'ot yud, lo makol savasa yesh b'yishu'ura lahaveh 10 kitot. And when b'tkadbrut 40 sa'ah, and when you bring together, you combine 40 sa'ah of this measurement of water, yasud me'alav kol ha'tafkitot atumah. Therefore, what emerges in every ailment, in every sickness, the totality is 400 levels. 400 levels. 400 levels of the Dark Lord's force, called Ruach HaTumah. It's a force. It's a force to remove the totality of those 400 levels that are included in every disease, in every uncleanliness, or wherever the Dark Lord has latched on, wherever that takes place, it can be removed by 40 sa'ah. Then all 40 disappear. It goes on to another part, which is not pertinent for that. V'da, he says, Ki shiur hamikvah haim 5,760 beitzim. Now, as we said before, what is the measurement of the mikvah? 5,760. And this is what I want to say now, says Avraham Azulai. I mean, I gave you a nice combination here of numbers, bringing you the relationship between mikveh and the tetragrammaton. What does all this spell up, and why water has this power? סוד העניין, כי לסוף 2,760 ליצירה, יתקיים ואת רוח הטומאה אוויר מן הארץ. In the year 5,760, for those of you who do not know which Hebrew year we're in, is 5,753. Now, I never saw this before. I never heard this before, I should say. Never heard this before. ויתקיים מקרא הדכתיב והשיבותי חיירה מן הארץ, דהיינו כוחות הטומאה, כי נזכר בזוהר. The Zohar says, from the verse in Leviticus, chapter 26, verse 6, on this verse, says the Zohar, there will be the removal of these kochot hatumah, the forces of tumah. וסוד העניין כי תחיית המתים עתה להיות גימל פעמים בגימל זמנים. There will be 3 resurrections of the dead. הראשונה היא תחיית המתים בארץ ישראל. First, there will take place the resurrection of the dead in Israel. והב' היא תחיית המתים בחוץ לארץ, outside of Israel. V'agimahu tchiyat hametim ayin umot ulekol olam uzman yom hadin hagadol. And then there will be, these two will be for the Jew first, and then the third one will be for all the nations of the world. V'zeh hatchiyah hatzlishit. And this third resurrection that I just mentioned, Zmana hi l'sof hei alpayim v'sheva me'od v'shishim liyisira. And all this will take place by the end of 5,760. And this is the week's reading. And now we can understand everything that's mentioned and all of the questions that we raised. This place, Hebron, why is it called Hebron, says the Zohar? And why is it called Kiryat Arba? Four. We were discussing the Tetragrammaton. Four. Now, some say, not incorrectly, that the reason Hebron was called Kiryat Arba, the city of four, because there was Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rivka, Jacob and Leah, and of course Adam and Eve. These four. So there are four couples there. Four couples. Therefore it's called Kiryat Arba. He Hebron, which is the name of that city where they are buried. This is the place that is unified. Coming from the word, says the Zohar, Chibur, comes all together. And also says the Zohar, when we ask the question, why does it say 100 year? Why does it say 20 year? And why does it say 7 year? 7 years. Says the Zohar, that Mea Shana is like Keter. Means Keter. It's a code. Mea. If you learn the Talmud Esesvirot in the morning, you have a straight light and returning light, giving each of the 10 Sfirot 10 dimensions. 10 times 10 is 100. That's Keter. That's the totality of everything. So says the Zohar. That means the life of Sarah contained Keter. Therefore it says Shana, because it's all unified. Keter is likened to the seed. I guess you've learned that. Keter is likened to the seed. The seed contains the root. The seed contains the trunk. It contains also the end product. Let's say if it was an apple seed, the apple. In the seed, it's all unified. Therefore, says the Zohar, why does it say Mea Shana? Because that is referring to the number 100. It's not just to give us how many years she lived, but to tell us that within the life of Sarah, there was Keter, which is unified. And therefore, when we ask why doesn't it say 100 years, because it's not referring to how many years. It's referring to a dimension, a force. Mea is Keter. When it says Ve'esrim Shana and 20 year, it doesn't say 20 years. Why doesn't it say 20 years? Because again, we're talking about Chachma and Bina. Chachma and Bina do not combine as two separate forces, but as one unified force, which was also present in Sarah. Therefore it says Shana instead of plural, because everything that is mentioned in the Torah as being plural, it means now there's division. Now there's division. In Chachma and Bina, there is no division. That's the energy store that we strive on Yom Kippur to achieve. You've heard the word energy store, because that always is in circuitry, never in short-circuitedness. Chachma and Bina, certainly. Keter is never in short-circuitedness, They're all living combined as one unified whole. Therefore, the word is only shana. Therefore, esrim shana, meaning 20, representing chachma and bina, each one having 10 subdivisions of itself, and therefore you have 20, just to give you a little more insight into that, even though it's 20, but they are in constant circuitry, like the seed. What is constant circuitry? It contains all. It's not subdivided. Like we say about tomorrow, yesterday, and today. That's fragmentation. If there is a tomorrow and a yesterday, there is fragmentation. And if you're connected to Chachma and Bina, there is no tomorrow, yesterday, and today. There is no fragmentation. There is one unified whole. Sheva Shanim. Why does it say 7 years? Because in our dimension, in our world of the 7, Sfirot, that's where you have years. What does it mean, years? That's where you have fragmentation. Shnei Chayei. This was Sarah's life, meaning she was combined of all of the Sfirot. Where? In Hebron. In her, there was no fragmentation. Therefore, says the Zohar, about the story, about she spoke to Sarah, she spoke to Eve, Eve left, and so on. Because these people represent how Tchiyat HaMeitim, how the resurrection of the dead can come about. They were not dead. They never died. They still live there today. But we know that there is death. Says the Zohar, that death is an illusion. I mentioned this once before, I think here. That, when we bury a person, yesterday, in fact, I mentioned it to Karen. It struck me at this funeral this week. I paid more attention to this because I was putting this consciousness in together with all of our people here who were present at that time, because obviously this was a significant death. When I noticed when that casket was being lowered, just as it was begun to be lowered, it was a wail. Everyone felt the pain at that moment. I asked myself, and that's usually, I've been to other funerals now, I recall, that's the time when the family, the close ones, become aroused. As now the person is leaving. But he died a few days ago. What's happening now more than what happened in the intervening moments or the intervening days from the moment of death to now being buried? The person's dead already. What's happening now that everyone becomes aroused by? Now this person is leaving. Now he's leaving. Zohar says, when it discusses the death of the Yaakov, Avraham, it doesn't say they died. It says they were gathered. They were gathered. Says the Zohar, when that body, and I'm trying to, this is how I could only answer why, at that moment, everyone is aroused and everyone feels the end. At that moment, see, as long as that body is in the coffin, body is still here. The moment it's disappearing into the earth, it's no longer here. What's happening? Zohar says, with Avraham, Yaakov, they never died. What does it mean they never died? Sarah never died. Here she's having a conversation with, says the Zohar. I mean, we don't know that from the Torah, but I read you the Zohar. That Sarah's having a conversation with Eve. Eve ran out of her home. Remember, she ran out. She says, I can't live here. I got to live somewhere else. And then she prayed, no, be together with us, and that's why we call it Hebron, because they're all living as a family unit, right? In that place, as one family unit. This is the way that Zohar describes it. As though when the earth is placed on this coffin, now the coffin is out of sight. But let's look at the other side of the coin. We are also out of sight of the deceased, aren't we? Now, who's out of sight of whom? And since we live in a world of illusion, who's living in the world of fragmentation? Who? Okay, we are. Because this is the world of illusion. That means we think that person is gone. This is part of the consciousness of living in the world of illusion. But by the same token, that person who's being buried, he's looking at us now saying, hey, you people are living in the world of illusion. I no longer am. And therefore, this whole exchange of consciousness is taking place as that person is being taken away from this realm. I asked, what's happening? I mean, same thing happened a few days ago. Person died. All of a sudden, now, the person is disappearing. Didn't he die a few days ago? No. That consciousness of the other party being buried, as the Zohar says, when that person is lowered into, when Avraham was lowered into the grave, it was that the world of fragmentation was gone, and therefore it says, Vahi Chayei Sarah, she lived. She lived. These are the years of living of Sarah. What does it mean? She never died. Therefore, almost the entire Zohar, on this week's portion, I won't have enough time. I thought I would have enough time. Is talking about Chiyat HaMeitim, resurrection of the dead. Now, resurrection of the dead, mentioned in other parts of the Zohar, is not only referring to, with the dead literally rise. Now, we should also understand another thing. Resurrection of the dead that we all hope, so we can see, it means more than just meeting up with your old relatives. It also, or with your father and mother, children, chas v'shalom maybe. It also means bila hamavet lanetzach. It means what? That death no longer takes place. I mean, what's the use of having the force of death take place and then immediately you're resurrected? I mean, that isn't the game that the Dark Lord wants to play. I mean, he wants to play the game of death. That's his purpose. And as Zechariah said, at that time, the force of Tumah, the force of the Dark Lord will be eliminated. This week's portion, and when we asked the question about, the 400 shekel, if you remember, what was that about? 400 shekel. This whole section is not dealing with how to purchase a burial plot. The whole idea, and why was his name Ephron, which I didn't add, Ephron, coming from the word afar, dust. He was the death. He was representing or symbolizing for us the Dark Lord. To remove him, to remove his ownership, right? What was happening when he would give him the 400 shekel? The ownership now would transfer to Avraham, right? So we read the story. Not the story. To remove the ownership, to remove the Dark Lord from our presence, requires this idea of 400. 400 what? The removal of the 400 forces of Tumah. And because of Avraham Azulai, how can we remove it? One of the, of course we have to be like Sarah too. I mean, we just can't keep killing people and stealing and lying and doing all of the things that we should not be doing. But someone who has already now wants to do what we call tshuva. He wants to start a new clean slate. What does he do with all of these forces of tumah that he had accumulated? The mikveh, says Avraham Azulai. The 400. To remove the 400. These 400 levels of tumah. That's what it means when he gave him the 400. He was removing from himself. He was removing from himself Ephron. Okay, when he gives him the 400, right, then he himself no longer is connected with him, and so on. All of the ideas that emerge just from this, what we call the sale of a burial plot, to remove and to have tchiyat hametim, outside of the idea that, according to Avraham Azulai, that's less than 7 years from today. Less than 7 years from today. And he said it'll be in stages. He said the last will be then. But what this week's reading, and why it's so significant, and every year that I read it, I never understood why, the Zohar could put all aspects of tchiyat hametim. There's many more. And I urge you, I think it's translated into English, not as intensely as Rabbi Ashlag explains it. But that's the mikveh. This immersion into these minimum of 40 sah creates a form of resurrection of the dead. Meaning the removal of the force of tumah. There is nothing. Nothing that we can do that can equal the removal of the Dark Lord. Nothing. As the mikveh, that's what emerges from what we have studied today. There are some other parts here, but I think that's what we want to what we'd like to draw from this reading. And that will take place on Shabbat. Now we just it explains too when it says, listen, my Lord, what's Beini Veinecha, what is this 400 between me and you? And what he's saying, the difference between me and you is the 400. That's the difference. The difference between life and death, the difference between illness and health is 400. Therefore, many parts of the Zohar now, when you read, whether you read it in Hebrew, you read it in English, it says 400 worlds separate us from Gan Eden. Many aspects, 400. 400. Do you remember when when Yaakov had fled from his brother, and he'd married Rachel and Leah, and then in Vayishlach, it says, and Yaakov sent angels to his brother. Let's get together. High time we finished our feud between us, right? And then tells us here about a whole story. And it says that, I'm just looking for the verse that you can, but anyway, do you remember how many people he came with, Esau? 400 people. I'm just looking for the verse. He came with 400 people. That's what the Torah says. Now he's coming against Yaakov because he really wants to annihilate Yaakov. Now, if you've learned already, if you've read a little Zohar, and from the Zohar, again, if you treat the Torah as storytelling, then like the rest of the world, not interested. As Rabbi Shimon said, on many occasions. He says, if this is all that the Torah was making an attempt is to tell us or provide us with a recording of history, to tell us stories, he said he knew writers in his days that could write far better stories, this was his words, than the Torah. Far better stories. Therefore, he says everything mentioned in the Torah represents a cosmic code. For what reason? That this should be our roadmap today. Is there a roadmap? What am I supposed to do today? This is the roadmap. Anyway, it says there that also he came with 400 people. He came with 400 people. Why 400? Again, Esav is another representation, another story on how we can eliminate the forces of evil. Wherever there is chaos, we should be learning, should be studying, should be receiving the energy by which we can have the proper consciousness to do things, or whatever we have to do, in the removal of the Dark Lord. And mikveh is certainly one of those steps. And with today's study, hopefully we shall achieve Tchiyat HaMeitim, not someday in the future, because in less than 7 years, it'll be the total resurrection, meaning those, I wasn't sure, does it mean then there'll be the automatic resurrection, or does it mean it'll take this period, and not everyone's going to be convinced that they can heal themselves. I mean, that's one of the worst things that I can try to convince people about, that from their illness they can just, with a little consciousness, maybe a little mikveh, get out of it. I mean, that's too simple. I mean, it doesn't mean no more going to a doctor, no more going to a hospital. I mean, are you trying to take away all of those pleasures, and all of those activities from life that we're all accustomed to? I mean, we need, so it's not that easy. Not everyone will be convinced that maybe we can do these things by ourselves. So I'm not sure if it means everyone will come to that consciousness and begin to tap the energies that are required to bring mikveh to this point. Although we hear many stories of how the reading of the Zohar, certainly that's why we recommend everyone should scan. If you can't read it, at minimum, everyone, I want to repeat again, should scan the Zohar in the morning, the weekly portion, because that's why there is a weekly portion. They just didn't decide that nobody wants to hang out. If Moshe had to read the whole Torah, each week, I mean, it would take too long. No one would come to the synagogue, so they decided to split it up into 52 weeks. Obviously, that's not the reason that they split it up, so it would be convenient, so we don't have to listen to the whole reading of the Torah, all in 1 week, but that each week already was destined by the years, and so on. I mean, if this is the year 5,753 in the solar calendar, this doesn't come out every year in the same week, and that was already planned in advance by the sages when they split it up, knowing that in 5,753 that we would be sitting here this week, the week of Avraham Azulai's death anniversary, to study Chayei Sarah, because on the calendar it'll be November. Today's the 19th. Tomorrow, I think it's Friday or tomorrow. Kav Daled. What is today in Hebrew? It's 24th day of. We made a mistake in the calendar, but it's the only mistake in the calendar. The calendar of the center. Death anniversary is wrong. It's the only one. It's written there 21, but this is, we took it from other calendars, many hundreds of years old. They recorded it 21, and then in this book I just read you from, it says, his book, that the one who put out this book, read in his right, read about people who were living in his time that he died on the 24th. Also very strange. But we know that each week, in each year, and it doesn't always come out, this is the energy we need for this week. To connect with that is the reading of the Zohar on that particular portion. That's why we read the Zohar. That's why when it comes out this week is significant. This week, and that's the reason I wanted to spend the time, this week can push out into the cosmos the consciousness of Tchiyat HaMeitim, the resurrection of arms, teeth, everything. You talk about resurrection, you talk about going back in time and everything else, where that's why through this reading, the age span now has gone up to 81. Only 150 years ago it was 37, and even science admits that they have not created the lengthy lifespan. It had gone down 150 years ago to 37 was the average age span. Now it's up to 81, and it took from Adam, or from Joseph 110 years, or from Moses 120 years. It took 3,000 years to go down to 37, and now in 150 years, it's gone up by 42 years, just in the span of 150 years. And by this consciousness, we speed up the process. That's why the Zohar is discussing this in Parshat Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah, not the death of Sarah, which should have been the name of the reading, right? The life of Sarah should have been the death of Sarah, because we're discussing that. Now, coming to the last question, which, as I said, I have not found a satisfactory answer as to what does Rashi mean, and all other commentators say that when she heard that that day that he was taking Isaac for the binding. Now we have to understand, he didn't get there in one day. This is all coming through me because I really don't know what the answer is yet. It took 3 days. So when did she hear it? You mean 3 days later? It took him 3 days to get there. When did she hear this? And she died. She died of aggravation. And you die in one day. You will die in one day. It's just not all logical. And we do know that she died the day that of the Akedah. We know that. She died that day. What it really means is not just she died that day. Not that she died that day. But in that day, she instilled life into the world. Why? Because what is Akedat Yisrael? And that, incidentally, that was the other condition. The people who want to completely heal themselves, meaning to remove the Ruach HaTumah, the Dark Lord spirit, to remove it, he says it must also include the central column. People must begin to restrict. Akedah, we know, means restriction. That because the restriction took place, that was the day that life buds, life springs up. That's why it's called Chayei Sarah. This is the answer. This is the other condition which the Zohar mentions for Tchiyat HaMeitim. That when a person dies and he does not go to hell or whatever all those things mean, it means that if a person had been exercising restriction, then he doesn't die. He doesn't die. The body is intact. We know that. Now, if we dug up the graves of righteous people, as the Nazis did, they did that out of sacrilegious, and didn't care to deface, cemeteries, they dug up graves of certain people and they found the bodies intact. And this was not done through mummification and so on. We know that the bodies of tzaddikim do not disintegrate. They do not disintegrate. They do not disintegrate. And the reason they do not disintegrate is because of the central column, says the Zohar. That's why these people still live. We just discussed about a discussion between Eve and Sarah. They literally live. Their bodies were not decomposed. I would not be surprised about this funeral that we attended, that this body will not be decomposed. Maybe. Okay, thanks.